Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. And a couple of weeks ago, I put out a tweet asking the question to you guys who the most irrelevant team in the NHL was, both right now and kind of in the larger scope of the NHL. And a lot of you guys responded with teams like the Calgary Flames after their brutal start. The St. Louis Blues were struggling mightily. The Nashville Predators had been asked the prior 2 years. The Columbus Blue Jackets are probably the most relevant team the last 20-ish years. And some of you guys, like me, agreed that it is the Seattle Kraken. So today, I kind of wanted to do an in-depth video essay, just going on the overall timeline of this team and how they've reached this point of kind of complete irrelevance, both now and in the larger scope, and are just stuck in no man's land and how they could potentially get out of it. Because yeah, after the success of the Vegas Golden Knights, the Seattle Kraken were announced, and they brought in Ron Francis in the summer of 2019 to be their general manager. Same Ron Francis, of course, that was one of the greatest players in NHL history, and in terms of his management experience before this, he was the president of hockey operations for the Carolina Hurricanes from 2011 to 2014, then promoted to the general manager. And how many times did the Carolina Hurricanes make the playoffs under Ron Francis? A whopping 0 times. But hey, I mean, the Carolina Hurricanes did make the conference finals the year after he left, so you could maybe make the argument that he built up that core by drafting guys like Aho in the second round and Slavin in the fourth round, that it was Ron Francis's team. Then Don Waddell put some pieces together and made them an actual playoff team and making the conference final. Now, Ron Francis had 2 full years to get ready for the expansion draft. And in fairness to Ron Francis and the Seattle Kraken, teams had definitely learned their lesson heading into that expansion draft compared to 2017, where Vegas got some absolutely insane deals from desperate teams. But again, with that said, Seattle still should have been far more proactive in thinking about their future by taking on bad contracts during the flat cap COVID period that other rebuilding young teams, especially like the Arizona Coyotes, were doing at the time. We can criticize them for that. But no, that's not really what they did. All they did was trade Vanacek back to the Washington Capitals after the expansion draft for a second-round pick, and McDermott and Pitlick for 2 fourths. But in the expansion draft, they had some very solid picks. They, of course, got Jared McCann, Vince Dunn, and Joey Daccord, who have now proven to be top line, top pair, and starting goalies in the NHL, but they didn't get any serious difference makers, of course. And the rest of the expansion draft, outside of those 3 guys, was kind of underwhelming. They picked a lot of older guys, suggesting that they did want to win relatively soon. But again, Vegas didn't even expect to win that first year. And when they started off strong, they had all those future assets to go out and trade eventually for guys like Max Pacioretty, like Mark Stone. That wasn't the case with Seattle, so they had this very lackluster roster and not a ton of assets. But thankfully, they did get the second overall pick in the 2021 NHL draft, which wasn't an absolutely loaded draft at the top, but they selected Matty Beniers, who, if I'm going to be honest, he was my #1 prospect in 2021, so I cannot blame them at all for that selection, and he projected to look like a future #1 Selke level center. In free agency that summer, Ron Francis kind of shows his hand that he wants to win relatively soon, going out and signing Philip Grubauer on a 6-year deal at $5.9 million. Which Grubauer, on paper, if you went to his hockey reference page that season, he had a fantastic year in that COVID-shortened year, having a .922 save percentage and 1.95 goals against, and was a Vezina finalist. But most models, in terms of goals saved above expected, had him only at like 3 to 7 goals saved above expected, which placed him as like a top 9 to 14 goalie that season. It was very clear that he was a product of the Colorado Avalanche, who were one of the best regular season teams in the NHL that year. And yeah, it was pretty telling that Colorado let him walk, then traded a first-round pick just to improve the goalie room and bring in Darcy Kemper, who ended up winning a Stanley Cup, even though he didn't play that good at the playoffs. As for the Seattle Kraken, it is not exaggeration to say Philip Grubauer has become one of, if not the worst goalie unrestricted free agency signing in NHL history. In his first season with the team, he posted an .889 save percentage. That's not me misspeaking. It's not .899, .888, and he has not cracked a .900 save percentage in any of his first 4 seasons with the team. He does have a .912 save percentage this season, but it's only in 6 games. If I was a betting man, I'd assume that that's going to go down by the end of the year. And then also in that summer, he would sign some veteran guys to the forward core, and Alex Wemberg on a 3-year deal at $4.5 million, and Jaden Schwartz on a 5-year at $5.5, making it seem further that he's trying to win relatively soon. And in that first year, they fucking sucked. They finished with 60 points points and ended up trading their first ever captain, Mark Giordano, just 55 games into his tenure. Also, to make matters worse, in an already weak 2022 draft class, they fell a spot after the New Jersey Devils jumped to second overall and they were selecting fourth overall. In the 2022 NHL draft, it went Slavkovsky, Nemitz, and then Logan Cooley, and they made the logical choice in going Shane Wright, who some people had as their number one prospect. I had him at number 3 behind Cooley and Slavkovsky, but still, at the time, at fourth overall, nobody criticized that pick, let's be honest. Shane Wright had really built up his hype and his exceptional status season at 15 years old, dominating the OHL, but in his draft year, he was still very good, but only around 1.5 points per game. When you look at other top OHL prospects, it usually is a little bit higher. There was some writing on the wall that he was just more physically mature at like 15 years old, and the rest of the development was not quite there. But still, again, I'm not going to act like they should have went with Cutter Gauthier. They would have got laughed at if they did that. Shane Wright was the logical choice. Also, in that 2022 offseason, they made a deal that I loved in the moment. They only gave up a 3rd and a 4th round pick for Oliver Bjorkstrand, who had been a consistent around like 50 to 60 point winger. And in that 2022-2023 season, it was quite the magical year and things looked very bright on the outside. At least they went from 60 points to 100 goddamn points and beat the reigning Stanley Cup champions in the Colorado Avalanche, and they took the Dallas Stars to 7 games. But when you looked under the hood of that team, it was a little bit fluky. They ranked 2nd in terms of goals scored above expected and 2nd in shooting percentage on the season. They were still an average to above average team, but not a consistent 100-point team. But hey, even if the rest of the team wasn't very young, at least their franchise number 1 center was looking like a franchise number 1 center, as Matty Beniers had 57 points and won the Calder, had awesome defensive analytics. The offensive analytics were pretty bad, but they'll improve over time, don't worry. However, as much as Beniers balled out, Shane Wright's development was kind of fumbled that season as he started at the NHL level, then played some games in the AHL, then went back to the OHL, and only played 36 total regular season games that year. But hey, back to the positives. Matty Beniers is looking legit, and in the 2023 draft, they have their first round pick at 20th overall, which is pretty funny that in 2021 and 2022, they picked very high when there weren't a ton of franchise-changing pieces within the top 5 of those drafts. Meanwhile, the 2023 draft, the top 8 outside of like Simashev and Reinbacher look amazing, and at 20th overall, they go with Edward Chalet, who unfortunately last year in the AHL did not quite produce to what you were expecting. With 21 points in 51 games, would have not been the guy I selected there. Then after the draft, heading into the offseason, Ron Francis, after making Game 7 of the second round, believed that his team was closer to a Stanley Cup final, a Stanley Cup, than being a bottom 8 team in the NHL, and that's exactly how he would act for the next like 13 months. And that started with not qualifying a 24-year-old Morgan Geekie, who was coming off a season where he had a solid 28 points in 69 games played. It's not like he was an AHL, NHL tweener. Morgan Geekie would, of course, go into unrestricted free agency and sign with the Boston Bruins for only 2 years at $2 million. His first season in Boston, 39 points. His second season, 33 goals. And to start this year, 20 goals in 27 games played, tied with Nathan McKinnon for the league lead. I'm not going to act like at the time we knew that Morgan Geekie would turn into this, but again, a 24-year-old, why are you letting a player like that go for literally nothing? Why are you not qualifying him? He doesn't really make any big signings in that 2023 offseason, and then in the 2023-2024 season, they come crashing back down to earth when they're not shooting at the same percentage, finishing with 82 points and moving off Alex Wenberg at the deadline for a 2nd and a 4th round pick, and deciding to re-sign Jordan Eberle instead of potentially getting like a 1st round pick for him. And the most concerning part of that season was the crown jewel piece of the franchise, Matty Beniers, after that Calder win with 57 points, sophomore slumped all the way down to 37 points in 77 games played. And the offensive analytics in terms of driving offense was still one of the worst in the entire NHL among top 6 forwards. He was still great defensively, but in terms of being a serious franchise number 1 center, the offense, both in terms of points and analytically, was just not showing up for Matty Beniers his first 2 years in the NHL. Meanwhile, Shane Wright in the AHL played full-time there and was pretty productive. He didn't dominate by any stretch and was starting to lose like his top 10 prospect in the NHL kind of status, but still was mostly viewed as a blue chip. But hey, entering the 2024 offseason, it wasn't all doom and gloom. You thought Ron Francis would admit that 2023 season was kind of fugazi, maybe sell off some of the veterans veterans. Look ahead to the 2025 Hagen's draft at the time. 2026, McKenna's looking like a potential generational talent. We can get this back on track. A little bit of a retool, even though we're like 3 years into our existence. And in fairness, although they didn't really need a center in the 2024 draft, I did like the Berkeley Cadden pick. I had him very high on my board. So as much as I want to criticize Ron Francis for his drafting, I probably would have picked Beniers, right, and maybe not Cadden. I probably would have went with Perek or a defenseman, but the drafting was not that bad. But hey, after selecting Berkeley Cadden, we have one of the brightest center futures in the entire NHL. Beniers, Wright, and Cadden. Let's look to the future. And then he goes and signs Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour to 7-year deals on July 1st, 2024. Up first, I'll try to start to be positive and go over the one deal that isn't a disaster, that being Brandon Montour, who signed a 7x7 coming off a Stanley Cup win in a 73-point season back in 2023. It's still a really stupid deal considering he was 30 years old when this got signed, coming off a season where they only had 81 points, but he does have 54 points in 101 games as a member of the Seattle Kraken. He's been Brandon Montour, good offensively, pretty bad defensively, and can handle top 4 22 minutes a night. But the Chandler Stevenson deal, much like the Philip Grubauer deal, is going to go down as one of the worst deals in unrestricted free agency history. Chandler Stevenson had been very effective on the Vegas Golden Knights on a very good team in a middle six role, even putting up back-to-back 60-ish point seasons, but in 2024, he dropped to 51 points and was a -9 on the Vegas Golden Knights. And especially in that 2023-2024 season, his defensive play fell off a fucking cliff. He was one of the worst defensive forwards in the NHL. And again, mind you, what made no sense about this signing is Chandler Stevenson's a center. You already have Beniers, you already have Shane Wright, and you just drafted Berkeley Cadden, and you signed Chandler Stevenson on a 7-year deal when he's 30 years old. In his first season, while granted he did play like the toughest minutes on the Seattle Kraken, he had the worst 5-on-5 expected goals percentage among the 374 forwards, with at least 500 even strength minutes at 38% and an actual goals percentage at 45%. And yes, he did semi-produce offensively, putting up 51 points, but a large lion's share of that came on the power play, and he only had 13 goals. This year, to start the season, that expected goals percentage is down to 35.6%, which is 4th worst in the NHL as of right now, and he's only scoring at half a point per game clip. But despite those numbers, he, for some reason, is still playing around 20 minutes a night for this team. So yeah, instead of thinking about the future, letting your 2 centers that you drafted in the top 5 eventually grow into their roles, you decided to sign Chandler Stevenson, a veteran center, as well as Brandon Montour, and just keep this team in the bottom 20 to 40% in the NHL. And yeah, the following season, he finished with 76 points. It was another brutal year. They were clearly closer to that first-year team than that second year. Thankfully, though, in that season, he did kind of think about the future, moved off his number 6 defenseman in a 3rd and a 6th round pick, Will Borgen being that defenseman, for Kaapo Kakko, who did play very good with the Seattle Kraken to finish out the season, 30 points in 49 games, but unfortunately only had 1 point in 8 games this season before getting hurt. And again, Kaapo Kakko at this point, probably going to be a decent to good middle sixer, which Seattle has a freaking plethora of. And then the team was so bad come the trade deadline, very much below 500, that he ended up trading expiring Yanni Gourde and Bjorkstrand, who had 1 more year left at $5.4 million, for 2 first-round picks and a second to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I mean, again, this isolated trade, very good value. Yanni Gourde was like 33 years old. You weren't going to re-sign him because you have so many young centers. And Bjorkstrand, although a very valuable player at a very reasonable cap hit of $5.4 million, you had plenty of wingers on your team, but you cannot look at this isolated. You cannot look at this in a vacuum because the dude signed 2 30-year-olds for 7-year deals this summer, and now he was selling. Also, not going in their direction is it wasn't Tampa Bay's 2025 first-round pick that would have been 23rd overall after they lost in the first round. It's their 2026 first-round pick, and after starting 1-4-2, they're 15-3 in their last 18 and now 3rd in the entire NHL, and they also have the 2027 first-round pick. Also, another isolated good deal. They got a 2nd-round pick for Brandon Tanev. Why the Winnipeg Jets gave up a 2nd-round pick for a bona fide, kind of washed 4th-line grinder, I don't know, but it was good value. And in that 2024-2025 season, Matty Beniers, it was more of the same. Bad offensive analytics, very good defensively, 40-ish points. But Shane Wright started to pop off. finishing with 18 goals and 42 points in his final 61 games. He did shoot 23% in that stretch, but it was looking like he was finally developing. We get to the 2025 NHL draft lottery, and they had the 6th best odds, and they fall to 8th overall after my New York Islanders jumped to 1st, the Utah Mammoth jumped to 4th, and they select another goddamn center at 8th overall in Jake O'Brien. Now, Jake O'Brien, talent-wise, was a top 7 to 10 player in that draft class. I'm not trying to dispute that, but in terms of fit, again, they selected Cadden at 8th in 2024. They selected Wright 4th in 2022. Benier 2nd in 2021. They are just assembling so many goddamn centers. Not saying you should draft based on fit. I am a best player available guy, but it gets to a freaking point. Jake O'Brien is crushing it with the Brantford Bulldogs to start out the season. It is a watered down OHL, so I'm not really sure how you view his 44 points in 24 games. And it does kind of stink that they fell to 8th overall because Porter Martone is killing it in the NCAAs, a better NCAAs with those CHLers. So if they stayed at their original 6th overall pick, maybe they could have got a potential franchise difference maker in Porter Martone. But hey, entering the 2025 offseason, surely after back-to-back seasons being well out of the playoff race, Ron Francis will admit it is time to tank for the McKenna draft. And you also have Keaton Verhoff, which you badly need defensemen. But nah, that's not really the plan. He ends up trading for Mason Marchment. He gives up a 3rd and a 4th round pick. I'm not going to kill this deal after trading away Bjorkstrand and Gord. They did need bodies, and you can eventually trade Marchment at the deadline. He only has 1 year left at $4.5 million. For a 3rd and a 4th round pick. I'm not going to get mad at that. I will, however, get very mad at them signing Ryan Lindgren on a 4-year deal at $4.5 million, who had been so bad the prior 2 seasons for mainly the New York Rangers, and then was bad after he got traded for a 2nd and a 4th round pick to the Colorado Avalanche. A 4-year deal at $4.5 million when you already had Vince Dunn, you already had Jamie Alexiak, and you already had young Riker Evans, who had 25 points at 22 years old and was playing a pretty decent role at 19:30 a night the prior season on the left side, and then you bring in Ryan Lindgren. And yeah, the results this season is about as worst case as I could imagine. They've won 11 out of their 24 games, but because they're racking up overtime and shootout losses, they're somehow in a playoff spot right now. Analytically, the team ranks dead last in terms of 5-on-5 expected goals percentage. Their special teams are better, but they still rank 7th to worst in all situations expected goals percentage. It's actually surprisingly been their goaltending that has really carried them, and it's not even Joey Daccord. He's been good, but he only has a 902. Philip Grubauer has a 912, and Matt Murray, yes, Pittsburgh Penguins Matt Murray, has a 922. They currently rank 5th in the entire NHL in save percentage at 907 with the Dallas Stars, but something tells me that's probably not going to be sustainable based on the inconsistency and injuries of Matt Murray and Philip Grubauer. And when you talk about a worst case scenario, it's not even their young talent that is carrying them right now to a playoff spot in the Western Conference. Matty Beniers has just 3 goals, 14 points in 24 games, and again, the analytics are the same as the last 3 seasons, the last 4 seasons. Elite defense, bad offense. Shane Wright, after building a lot of momentum in those final 3 quarters of the 2024-2025 season, only has 5 goals, 11 points in 24 games, and he has 5 goals while shooting 16%, and he's only playing 14 minutes a night because Chandler Stevenson is playing 20 minutes a night. And young Berkeley Cadden is also struggling, and we kind of expected that because he is a very skilled, undersized guy at 5'10", but he has 0 goals, 5 points in 19 games, only playing 12 minutes a night, and because the rule change doesn't go into effect next season, he can't go to the AHL right now. So it's either the NHL where he's playing a bottom 6 role that doesn't suit him, or you can send him back to the WHL where he has 225 points in 125 games the last 2 years. He's just on another level compared to those guys. Another young forward that we maybe had some hope and expectations for was Yanni Newman, who was a 2022 second-round pick and had 28 goals in the AHL last year. He's been in and out of the lineup sporadically and only has 3 goals, 3 points in 15 games. And when he does play, he only plays 10 minutes a night. And then lastly, Riker Evans. He's had to play on the right side, even though he's a lefty, because they signed Ryan Lindgren on the bottom pair with Jamie Alexiak. And he went from playing 19:30 a night to now playing 17 minutes a night because they got to give Ryan Lindgren second pair of minutes. And let me just say something also with this team going forward. They badly need to overhaul their developmental staff. The fact that Matty Beniers came in and had that 57-point season, even though it was slightly inflated with his shooting percentage and his on-ice shooting percentage, the fact that he has regressed offensively so much, and that is unacceptable for a guy at 20 years old to do what he did. Shane Wright is not progressing like you would expect. Like, who is a guy that they have outside of Jared McCann, but even the writing was on the wall in that COVID-shortened season. Vince Dunn had great underlying numbers on St. Louis, and then he got to Seattle where he had a bigger opportunity. They have really not developed jack dick in Seattle as of right now, and that needs to change going forward, or else even if they get a McKenna, a Stenberg, or a Verhoff, they might not develop them. They're the West Coast New York Rangers. And I mean, getting back to the overall team, yes, they're in a playoff spot right now, but it's not really sustainable considering it's coming from the goaltending. And I think we all agree that 2 of the 3 between Edmonton, Utah, and Winnipeg probably is going to figure it out and kick them in the Chicago Blackhawks out of the playoff picture. Or maybe they make the playoffs as the 8 seed, and I don't think that they're going to have the same luck that they did back in 2023. I think the Colorado Avalanche would absolutely steamroll them. But again, it's a worst case scenario season because of this hot start in terms of actual points, not the actual team on the ice. They are now not going to be able to get below like 80 points and have a very, very good shot at a truly franchise-changing player. So that's why I continue to say that they're the most irrelevant, stuck in no man's land team in the NHL. They don't have any stars or superstars right now. They don't have any future stars and superstars based on Shane Wright, Beniers, and Cadden's play. They're just perfectly stuck in no man's land the next 2 to 3 seasons at least. Like, trust me, I know what I'm talking about. My New York Islanders were saved by the draft lottery. You cannot rely on a 3% chance to get you a special talent like a Matthew Schaefer. If we had just like Eklund right now at 10th overall, as much as I love Eklund, we would have a pretty dog shit future right now. So that's why the only way they could potentially turn this around is once they start falling out of a playoff spot is to aggressively trade guys and hope that you can tank it up the rest of the way. It starts with Jared McCann. He really needs to be off this team considering he has 1.5 years left at just $5 million. You're not doing shit this year. You're not doing shit next year. Are you going to give him some kind of 8x8 that he's going to want by then? No, you need to trade him at this year's deadline, and you would get a first and like an A- prospect for a guy that has been a consistent 30-30 kind of guy without a number 1 center. They're not going to trade Vince Dunn and Joey Daccord, and I do understand that to a degree. Vince Dunn, in my opinion, is like a top 15 to 25 defenseman in the entire NHL. Those don't grow on trees. You have nothing in terms of defenseman prospects right now, and Joey Daccord is locked up at a very reasonable cap hit, 29 years old, but Jared McCann is that one core piece that has to go and has to be expendable. And then you got to look at the rest of the guys that don't have a lot of term. Jordan Eberle is an expiring guy at $4.75 million, still a very effective middle 6 forward, and he is your captain. You got to swallow your pride and you got to trade another captain. Like, in a weird way, you got to move off Eberle. You got to distance yourself from that 2023 season because as magical as it was fool's gold. You keep on returning to that thinking that you can get back to that status, get back to that kind of run when that was a 1 in 100 kind of season based on the talent that was actually on the roster. And then the 2 other guys are Jaden Schwartz and Mason Marchment. Both have 1 year left. Schwartz is at $5.5 million. Marchment is at $4.5 million. You can get like a second, definitely a 3rd round pick for those guys. So yeah, if they start to really sell once things start going south, and they kind of have at this point, they've lost their last 3 games, they could still end up in like the bottom 5 to 8 in the NHL. They're not that far gone. Thankfully, there's not a lot of teams tanking this season, but if they trade McCann, Schwartz, Marchment, they're going to stink the rest of the way. Eberle as well. You got to trade 2 of 3 of those expiring guys. But if you do that, you pick up a first and a good prospect for McCann. You pick up 2nd and 3rd round picks for Eberle, Marchment, and Schwartz. You could be looking at 3 first-round picks this season, 2 next season. You still have Tampa's 2 picks. You got to remember that. And actually have a direction, actually have a future. And although you might not get a McKenna, a Stenberg, a Verhoff, guys like Belichitz, Lynn, Rubrick, and Lawrence would immediately become their top asset in their franchise if they were selected this year. So yeah, the Seattle Kraken, they're stuck in no man's land. If anything, their direction the last couple of years have actually been thinking that they're a good team. They need to flip that. They need to reverse that and admit the next 2 years probably isn't going to be good. But this core right now is not very good. You need to have a direction, not to bring it back to my New York Islanders, but to bring it back to them. Lamoriello thankfully picked the direction for this team when he traded away Brock Nelson, got Richie, got a 1st round pick. Then Darsh continued that by trading Noah Dobson. Look at the Islanders. They have a solid future now. Seattle needs to do the same, and they actually have some assets that are of value, like a Jared McCann, to potentially make that happen. They already have 2 first round picks from the Tampa Bay Lightning. And if they end up finishing with like 84 points this year, they don't trade McCann, they extend them this summer, they're going to be fucked for the next 4 to 5 years, not just the next 2 years like they are right now. So they preferably need to get Ron Francis out of there. That's not going to happen. He just got promoted to president of hockey operations. I forgot to mention that earlier. Botterill's the general manager now. But yeah, they need to admit that this team is not remotely close to contending and turn it around and think to the future. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about the Seattle Kraken? Do you think that they're the most irrelevant team in the NHL? Do you think they're stuck in no man's land? If not, who else? I'll be seeing the next one. Peace.